Good evening. Welcome, everyone. My name is Sarah Zenaida Gould. I'm Executive Director of the Mexican American Civil Rights Institute. Thank you for joining tonight's MACRI talk. We'll be discussing Chavez Ravine, an unfinished story with Dr. Priscilla Leiva. Welcome. Before we get started, I will share just a little bit about Dr. Leiva. She's an associate professor of Chicana, Chicano, and Latino studies at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. She received her PhD in American Studies and Ethnicity from the University of Southern California in 2014 and holds a bachelor's in American Studies from Yale University. Her research interests include relational ethnic studies, urban history, and sports history, particularly as it relates to placemaking and community formation. She's currently working on a book manuscript that examines how stadiums have produced and sustained racial meanings that shape ideas about the city and belonging. She's also the lead researcher for Chavez Ravine, an unfinished story, an oral history and archival collaboration that documents a long history of displacement and its aftermath in Los Angeles. Her research has been funded by the Andrew Mellon Foundation, the American Council of Learned Societies, Social Science Research Council of the Mellon Mays Foundation, the Smithsonian Institution, and the University of Texas at Austin Center for Mexican American Studies. Her public humanities work includes collaborations with the National Museum of American History, LA Plaza de Cultura y Artes, Imagining America, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and Boyle Heights Museum. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, let's get into it because Dr. Leiva, I know you are there in Los Angeles and a lot is happening really relevant to our community right now. But the history that you specialize in is also really relevant and remains relevant to today. So I'm going to turn it over to you. And audience, as always, let us know where you're joining from in the chat and if you have any questions, and we'll try to answer those at the end of the presentation.
Great. Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you for the welcome. I don't know what to call it, relief or distraction from what's happening. It's been a hard couple, almost over a week now of just feeling, our communities are under siege, and it's a scary time. And the Dodgers have a part in this narrative as well. So I'm happy to talk about that at the end of this talk. I really want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about something that is both my active scholarly research, but that comes out of a community partnership, that comes out of really working hand in hand with community to preserve particular neighborhood histories. And so I am, as Sarah said, I am the co-founder and lead researcher for Chavez Ravine, an unfinished story, which I co-founded with Carol Hawkes, who is from the Palo Verde neighborhood of what we now call Chavez Ravine. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But at first, I'd like to start by introducing you to her.
In my youth, I lived in Palo Verde, one of the three areas now known as Chavez Ravine, the home of the Los Angeles Dodgers. My grandfather, Lorenzo Ayala, came to Los Angeles in 1907 from Michoacán, Mexico. In Los Angeles, Lorenzo had a horse and buggy. He picked up passengers and freight from the railroad station and took them to their destination. From his business, he saved enough money to buy 2 lots in Palo Verde. On one lot, he and his sons built a family home, 1 room at a time. On the other lot, my family grew vegetables and raised chickens, goats, and a variety of other animals to sustain ourselves. Our family planted avocado, zapote, orange, and lemon trees all around the house. My Uncle Sisto made a fish pond in our front yard. My tia Agapita planted many roses, lilies, and other seasonal flowers that she would cut and take to the Santo Niño Catholic Church for the Altar Society. It was the Altar Society's job to maintain the altar with seasonal flowers. Many of the ladies in our community contributed their prized flowers to the Santo Niño altar. There was no apartment buildings in Palo Verde, only homes with big yards. Effie Street, our main street, intersected with Paducah Street. On Effie Street was the church complex, 2 big stores, a barber shop, a beauty shop, and several other businesses. Across the street was a school and a Free Methodist church. The ambience was peaceful and lush. I lived in a park. In the morning, I would wake up to the sound of roosters crowing and birds singing. Sometimes I would hear an owl. My tia Agapita would take me to the church Escuelita, where I learned my numbers and ABCs in Spanish, while she and her friends worked on decorating and cleaning the altar at Santo Niño Church. When it was time to go home, Thea and I would walk up Paducah Street to our house. On our way up the hill, we would greet our neighbors. As Thea and her friends chatted, I got to play with the children. We would exchange bocaditos, the latest recipes, and garden spices. Sometimes the exchange would include a piece of a new plant that would be planted in our garden. One time, I got a puppy. Dinner always included homemade tortillas. We had plenty of fruits and vegetables from our yard. At home, we spoke both English and Spanish. After dinner, the family listened to the radio. Then it was bedtime for my brother Buddy and me. At night, it was very dark, almost black, because we didn't have street lights. But when I looked out the window from my bed, I could see the light of the moon, and it seemed to be a million stars shining on us. I would fall asleep to a concert of chirping crickets. My family was evicted from Palo Verde in 1951 to make room for affordable housing projects that were never built. We moved to an apartment in the city only 3 miles away. In the city, there were a lot of lights and noises from the cars. It took us a long time to get used to the constant noise. I am still homesick for a home to which I can never ever return to.
So I wanted to start with Carol's words because she is someone who lived in this neighborhood that at the time of their displacement was about 1,200 families strong. And part of the project that we co-founded together has been about providing this history from the perspectives of the residents who experienced it firsthand. Up to this point, even as a graduate student, when I began doing my work on the history of what is now Dodger Stadium, um, there were a lot of archival collections that were scattered around LA and that for the most part focused on external perspectives, whether that be city planning, whether that be certain kind of ephemera archives, or even kind of housing authority archives, city archives, LA Times, all of these kinds of narratives produce a story that didn't center the voices of the residents or the people who experienced this firsthand. And this is a community that first really started to develop in Los Angeles in the 1910s, and then got bigger. And by the 1940s, as I said, there were about 1,200 families. And these families, these photos are all Carol Hawkes's family photos that are part of the archival collection that we are hoping to launch in the next couple of months, at least a preview for. And so you can kind of see a little bit of the texture of the film, of the archive. This photo is not from the archive, but it does show people outside of their homes receiving a notice that really is going to change their lives forever. And I just want you to pay attention to the house that they're outside of, because one of the reasons, or the main reason why they were removed and that this was justified, was because their neighborhood was designated as blighted or a slum. And so some of these photos, I really encourage you to look at the structures and think about, ask yourself, does this look like what we would assume is a slum, right? Before I kind of talk a little bit about what happened to them, I do want to touch base on why they live there in the first place. And in short, it really is because Mexican Americans, and other people of color were very limited in terms of where they could live in Los Angeles because of what were called restrictive covenants or racial covenants. LA was a leader in establishing these, but these were something that you could encounter across the country. And so these basically were written on the bottom right. You see that's an actual that's part of the tract deed, and it was written into the deeds of homes that anyone who was not white could not live in particular neighborhoods, and which was really the majority of Los Angeles. These ads for homes, you can see, is kind of the ways that these were communicated. So on the left, it's for the neighborhood of View Park in LA, and it's called a restricted, fully improved residence park. For an advertisement in Hollywood, it's a lot more direct and talks a lot about urban change, which hints at race, but doesn't actually ever say it. And I think it's really important for us to understand that these restrictive covenants sometimes discussed race, but also for the most part used coded language around property and your investment. And so it says something like, protect your family by procuring at today's price a home in a secured by fixed and natural restrictions against the inroads of metropolitanism, right? And so there's a lot of coded language there that is connected to that. The restrictive covenants worked hand in hand with redlining. And I just want to point out some kinds of key fundamental assumptions that we connect to restrictive covenants and redlining. Part of what is really important to understand is that, like other parts of the Southwest, this was a land that was, and across the country, this was a land that was occupied and shepherded for centuries by indigenous people. And through the process of colonization, that land, which was previously communal, which was previously was connected in terms of a relationship to the earth, and it was seen in that way, that under a kind of capitalist society, first with Spain, then Mexico, then the United States, really transformed land into a commodity. And so, but land is really specific because it is something that is both, it's really unique because it's both a financial investment and a commodity, but it's also something that we live in and that shapes our everyday lives according to them. And so we have to kind of think about in this work and in other work, when we're talking about displacement, of the ways that the lived experience of race, of being Mexican American or being being a person of color, is shaped by the land and the homes that you're able to access and live upon. Our home's value as home is important. But so I just kind of want us to think about the ways in which, because of the kind of capitalist understanding of land as a commodity, it is specific in the sense that it is both a financial investment and something that shapes our experiences. And when we're talking about it as a financial investment, then we're able to use kind of coded language, because it then does not become about, oh, well, this area is populated by a certain type of people or anything. It then becomes, well, is this place a good investment or not, right? And so you're able to kind of not talk about race, even though what you're talking about is actually race, if that makes sense. And so this is the redlining map of Los Angeles, where you'll see the areas that are marked in red were seen as risky investments by the homeowners loan corporation map. So what it means is that the areas in red were not given, mortgages were not federally backed, which meant that the interest rates on loans to buy homes in those areas were higher than some of the green areas that include Beverly Hills. It was green, and then the best one was green, and then blue, and then yellow, and then red. And so you have this kind of perspective. And on the top right, you'll see that this is the neighborhoods of Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop, which are the three neighborhoods that we now call Chavez Ravine. And you'll see that, this language is straight out of the loan corporation maps, where it seems to come up to begin descriptive in the sense that it says, the land is level to hilly with some sharp grades, which constitute construction hazards. Land improved 55% out of a possible total of 85%. That statement is really key, partly because the transformation of land into a commodity also was connected to the idea that if you are not using the land to its utmost value, then it can be seized and be used for what might be considered, quote unquote, a better purpose or a public purpose, slash the kind of formation of what we call eminent domain, which is national. Cities across the countries experience this. There are examples in San Antonio and other parts of Texas that have experienced, the government being able to take property, pay what they consider market value, and then use that land for some type of public good. And so that language about the fact that these neighborhoods were only, quote unquote, developed 55 out of possible 85% is also part of what justified the use of eminent domain in this area. You'll see that they kind of they describe public and parochial schools, and then all of that within walking distance of the city. It then goes on to say that this is an extremely old area, which was never highly regarded. A part of it is known as, quote, Dogtown, a typical Mexican Pun district, which Pun meant simple-minded at the time. Although there are a few old, fairly presentable homes, which are still in original ownership, the area as a whole is dilapidated and inhabited by a highly heterogeneous and subversive population. And that's why it was redlined and considered blighted. It's really important to know that at this period in U.S. urban history, that it was thought that in order for neighborhoods to be really successful and be good investments, that they be homogeneous. It was very scary for people to think that a kind of mixed or heterogeneous neighborhood could be could actually be successful or rise in value or something like that. The other part that's really interesting about this statement is that the three neighborhoods in Chavez that now make up Chavez Ravine were very much predominantly Mexican and Mexican American, but stating something as heterogeneous was one of the key markers in terms of enabling it to be considered a slum for what comes next. And so I just want to point that out. Part of what ends up happening while people are able to create the community that Carol kind of details so beautifully in the intro that I showed you all, is that the neighborhood was connected to downtown LA. You could walk down the hill, and that's what people would do regularly. But it was also a neighborhood that had galvanized and kind of kept to itself over the course of the first half of the 20th century. And it was actually in it was in September of 1950 that Frank Wilkinson, who at the time worked for the Housing Authority in Los Angeles, really starts to pay attention and to identify Chavez Ravine as a place for development in Los Angeles. He was a progressive meaning the progressives of the 1930s that really thought about how to make cities cleaner and healthier. And he was a huge advocate for public housing. After he graduated from UCLA, he actually went off on this tour where he toured really impoverished places. He went to Hull House in Chicago, he went to India, and he really just wanted to understand and to kind of bear witness to impoverished places. And he then comes back to Los Angeles, starts working for the Housing Authority, and really decides to drum up a lot of support for public housing by hosting what he called, quote, slum tours. And these in some ways echoed what he did when he out of college, when he graduated from UCLA. He would take a bunch of families and basically give them tours through communities of color that he designated slums, in hopes that he was going to be able to kind of galvanize support for his vision of making Los Angeles a city without slums. And so he then Chavez Ravine, or the three neighborhoods, become the kind of crown jewel of this plan. This is a plan that is funded by the FHA, the Federal Housing Authority, and there's all kind of legislation for building public housing at the time. And so then he distributed a notice to residents in Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop, and this is the original notice that says that their home is in the way of a major public housing project. Their house will be purchased at what they consider market value. And it's really important to kind of consider that, right? That if your house is first considered blighted or marked as blighted, then fair value is determined off of that. Then the residents obviously were given much less than they deserved in terms of their home. The other part of the notice that is really misleading is that they informed residents that they would get kind of the first opportunity to move back into Elysian Park Heights, which was the public housing project that they had planned, that was designed by the famous mid-century architect Richard Neutra. But part of what seems to have gone over a lot of people's heads, that residents are always reminding me, is that they were homeowners. In some cases, they owned 2 properties, or they owned their home plus the store, or the home plus the beauty shop. And so as homeowners, they would not have been eligible for any type of public housing projects, right? And so that was a pretty empty promise in their mind. And so they resisted. What you're seeing here is an image of a sit-in at City Hall. Residents decided that they should send the women of the community in hopes that that would shield them from violence, but also because the men had to continue to work. And so the kind of political pressure of trying to save the homes really fell on or were taken up by the women in the community. They also attended city council meetings to protest the taking of their homes. And that's when the city enacted eminent domain against them in order for them to be able to seize the properties and pay them market value. This kind of goes on in 1950. By 1951 and early 1952, over 95% of the residents have left, and there's about 24 families that stay behind. 1953 and 54, what we have is an increasing fear around the Cold War and around the Red Scare. And so public housing ends up becoming a story of creeping socialism. The LA Times jumps on this. Part of this, it's also fueled by developers who own interests, who have large tracts of land in the 3 communities, and they didn't want their investment in the land to go bad by building public housing. And so there's all kinds of forces that are really fighting the public housing project, which with the entry of the new mayor, Norris Poulsen, the project gets scrapped and the landscape really stays in limbo for a couple of years until in 1957, the LA authorities, including LA city authorities and LA county authorities, end up entering a sweetheart deal with the LA Dodgers, where they are offering this hilltop to them. And the Dodgers end up privately funding the construction of the stadium. The city pays for leveling it. And there is much news about the Dodgers coming. But before they're able to do that, they have to contend with the fact that there's still about 24 families in Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop. And so in May of 1959, this episode or this scene is aired nationally. So, as you can imagine, that scene was incredibly shocking to a lot of people across the country. And Ed Roybal, who was the city council person for the district at the time, received letters from people across the country really shocked at this idea that homeowners could be physically removed from their homes and their homes could be bulldozed in front of them. That really kind of struck really hard for a lot of people that were not Mexican or Mexican American, or even people of color, just because the connection between home ownership and American identity is so strong and so deep, and kind of considered, a sacrosanct right to have the right to property. That this was just very disturbing. I think we're in a moment, and we've been in many moments where we've seen all types of disturbing footage that is readily available to us on social media today. But an image like that on television in 1959 was pretty unheard of and really rattled a lot of people. It especially rattled Carol Hawkins, who was, again, my co-founder, who you saw at the beginning, and this is her again. And so she is displaced at the age of 8, and then at the age of 17, has since settled in a nearby neighborhood of Silver Lake. And at the age of 17, she sees her neighbors getting pulled from their house, and the house is bulldozed again, bulldozed right in front of her. And so that for her really, sent a lot of messages to her and a lot of and Latinos across Los Angeles, that this city that they were not a part of the future of this city. This was very much a wound that people in Los Angeles still speak about today, literally speaking about it today in light of the Dodgers' silence on ongoing events. And so this is something that really struck Carol strongly, and she was really unable to talk about it for a long time. She became a lifelong activist as a result, and this really politicized her. You can see her here with Cesar Chavez, and she's really been a lifelong social justice warrior that's been part of major political movements all across California, including the fight against the sterilization of Mexican American women, and the creation of all types of multiracial coalitions. And to this day, she's over 80 years old and still very active, to the point where, political candidates regularly ask her for an endorsement. So she goes on to work for the county for 30 years. And upon retirement, she, during that time, had been very upset, and especially upset at the Dodgers. She was in a documentary that I want to say it was in 2000, where she calls it dropping the F-bomb. You can imagine what that is. But when they talk about the Dodgers trying to do an olive branch ceremony in the late 90s, she says, "I don't want your effing olive branch in this documentary." And she asked the director to not include that in the film. He ended up including it anyways. And Carol was savvy enough to understand that there was B-roll and there was all of this research connected to that film. And she really kind of struck on the moment and understand, because he basically apologized for including it when he told her he wouldn't. And she said, "Okay, then I want your B film. I want all of your research. I want your videos. And I want it to go to a library and an archive of my choosing." This was years before we met. She didn't find a suitable home. She wasn't quite sure what to do with the collection that the director had promised. And then we met, and we instead began to embark on a project that was about really telling this story from the perspective of residents, and also telling a much deeper textured history that goes far beyond the focus on removal. So oftentimes a lot of the research and conversations about these 3 neighborhoods really encompasses the years from 1950 to 1962, when Dodger Stadium is constructed. But that flattens a very deep and really important history when you're looking at the history of Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop. Photos like this remind us, and I do also want you to know that the rate of homeownership in these three neighborhoods was actually higher than the rate of homeownership in California at the time. It was over 60%, which tells you the kind of level of stability that the neighborhood experienced. But also when you see when families are sharing photos like this, it gives a very different picture than what history has told us about these neighborhoods being considered slums or blighted. By the time that they were displaced from their neighborhoods, the rise of the Mexican American generation had really taken hold in Chavez Ravine. You heard English, Spanish, and Calo, or the language of the Pachucos and the Suitors. There were a number of military veterans who came back from World War II only for a couple years later to understand that their homes were taken over. And so we've really embarked and set off on creating, documenting these photos. One thing that we do is that we are digitizing the collections of the elders, because one thing that has happened to these communities, and you can imagine just for your own self, if you had personal photos or personal documents, would you really trust kind of a scholar or an institution to take it? And some people do, and some people give it willingly, and that's great. But for the most part, we understand that there have been a number of scholars, documentarians, all types of people who have kind of come in and met with people of the three neighborhoods, kind of received what they wanted from them, and in order to write their book or produce a documentary or something like that, and then are never really heard from again. And so Carol, understanding this, and we decided to move differently. And one thing that we do is that we, all of the donors retain the copyright to their photos. So even though we are going to be able to house it and to show it, we are not we're not the ones who will be licensing it out. And so if anybody wants to actually use these images, we would direct them back to the donor family, and they would decide. The other aspects of this has been that the kind of community preservation has been very much an interactive and community event where people's histories are being jogged, and they themselves are the original historians of their communities. And so we really pay attention to what they have to say. And even as we've been deep in metadata, for those of you. So when you go online and you look at kind of different artifacts in a digital library, there's all this information, including the description and everything. And I've learned, I'm not a librarian, and I've just learned how time consuming that can be, because that's what we've been deep in, is writing all of the metadata for these images. And so one thing that we are making sure to do is that when we're able to, we are going to incorporate a personal narrative or a personal story from the donor themselves if they have something to say about the individual photos. And so these are some of the photos that we've collected. On the top left is one of the few times that it snowed in Palo Verde. And so that was a big deal. And so even these homes that you can kind of see the structures, you can see the yards, and you can see their cars, right? That just to really kind of fill out some of this history. We also had, because the area had a police academy very close, there were all types of public programs that youth were part of, them really becoming Mexican American as the generation. And so they were Boy Scouts, and they were part of the police academy. And the other reason why I just want to point out why this project has really been possible, we are now up to over 600 items that have never been seen before. And we've also been able to inherit, like I said, that Jordan Metcher, the very generous documentarian who gave us all of his B-roll, he actually has all of these audio interviews that he did in the 90s. And one of the biggest things that we're not expecting to do, but has been a really important part of this, is that those people who gave those interviews, first off, did not necessarily sign permissions or anything like that. But they also never received a copy of it. And so, unfortunately, a lot of the people who were on these audio cassettes have passed. And so, one unexpected kind of part of this project has been trying to find the descendants of some of these people, of all of these people, so that we can give them these interviews from their ancestors, whether it be their parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles. And it's been a really I think that's probably the most emotional experiences that I've had in as part of this project, because we've been able to give descendants the opportunity to hear the voice of their loved ones in interviews that they didn't even know existed. But part of the reason why we're able to do this work again is because of people like Alfred Zapeta, who you see on the screen. He is the last founding member of a group called Los Desterrados, or the Uprooted. And so he, alongside who they call a visionary, Luz Santillan, and other families, basically decided to start a reunion. Then this year is going to be the 50th anniversary of the Los Desterrados reunion, where elders and their families come together to share photos, to share stories. And again, this project is something that literally came out of community and is really only possible because of the fact that they have been really key in preserving their own history for so many years. And a lot of what we're doing is really just trying to create the infrastructural support so that these artifacts and these photos and that their history is preserved in perpetuity. And so you can see here why I call them the original historians of their own story, is because they don't just show up to this picnic and hang out. They actually, you can see, do their preservation work as well. They have statements, as you can see, as some of the posters that say things like, we are from Los Angeles and here we will stay. And it's just a very important place for them to kind of gather. And so I just want, I also want to point out that where they are gathering is actually, was their playground in some ways. It's directly across from Dodger Stadium in the larger Elysian Park area, which was really, when Carol is talking about where they would play and that she said we basically grew up in a park, that's what she's talking about. And so they've been reuniting. This year will be the 50th year in the place that they used to play as children. And so one of the things that, and so for that reason, a lot of times when I do oral history interviews, they will request that we do them there. And it's one of those things that, as historians, we always want, when we do interviews, we want it to be completely quiet. And we would put somebody in a sound booth if we could, but we also have to think about what will make that person the most comfortable, what will jog their memories. And so it's meant that for us, we're happy to do oral histories, even if there's background noise, even if whatever that may be, just because it's actually more important for people to be able to tell their story and to their memories to be jogged in whichever way makes the most sense. And so one of the things that we've been really dealing with, and especially since COVID, is that the numbers of elders that are still from Chavez that were born in one of the three neighborhoods is certainly dwindling. And so we have a lot of urgency to be able to get this project at least previewed before that happens even further. But it's also something that is really important in terms of the sense of perseverance and the stories of residents after the fact. So it's through these communities and these picnics that we've been able to ask, well, what happened after? Where did you go live? Oftentimes, because the restrictive covenants or racial covenants were outlawed in 1948, a lot of people had the experience that Carol had, where she was the first non-white family on her street. Some of these families were the first non-white family in the entire like suburb that they moved into. And so and we continue to tell that story. The other aspects of this is that there are people like Carol who become lifelong activists. There's other people who just get involved in politics, and really important stories come up, like the story of one family that said, when we got this notice, we couldn't afford a lawyer and we didn't have the knowledge to fight it. So what could we do? So we just took the little bit of money that the city offered us, and we went on our way. And the next generation, there were 7 lawyers in that family, right? And so I think that those are really important stories to continue to capture, and that we lose if we only focus on this community through a 12-year span. I also just want to kind of draw your eyes to something that's happening in Los Angeles. As far as I'm familiar with, I know that this is something that's happened. It's happened in Austin, and to a smaller degree, possibly in San Antonio, is the ongoing kind of displacements as due to gentrification in the city. And so this map is part of the urban displacement project that comes out of the University of California system. And what it means is that the purple spots are basically, quote, advanced gentrification, meaning that a lot of people have been displaced at that point. And then the blue is also susceptible to displacement or ongoing displacement, right? And so the part of the importance of preserving this history and what the residents of Chavez Ravine has shown us in terms of why it's so important is that we're living in a city right now that is transforming rapidly, and we are not moving quick enough to archive the stories. These were homeowners in Chavez Ravine that, had they been left alone, that property would have been very valuable. But it was also the largest concentration of Mexican American landowners in Los Angeles. And so you can think about this neighborhood on an upwardly mobile trajectory, because they owned homes, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, in 1940, 1950. So you can imagine where they would be now. And so a lot of youth, when we do events that we call pláticas, where we bring elders to kind of tell their story to the public, we actually get a lot of youth that are from neighborhoods that are experienced pretty rapid gentrification about what do we do, how do we fight this? And so there's a lot of connections that people feel. What's also really important to kind of think about is, on the left is the map that I just showed you, and on the right is the redlining map that I showed you earlier. And if you look, you're able to actually see that the same areas that were once redlined are now the areas that are most vulnerable to gentrification and to displacement due to gentrification. And so, we have to kind of ask ourselves, why now? Why this neighborhood now that was not considered desirable, as you could see from the language that I showed you earlier, but then now is kind of the prime place of removal all over again. And so this is something that is an ongoing challenge and an ongoing struggle in Los Angeles, but it's also something that is felt across the nation and in respective cities with these similar dynamics. Oftentimes, redlining maps are matching kind of ongoing displacement maps of today. And so for us in this project, the relevance of this history is very deep and bears on contemporary events constantly, whether that be because of gentrification and housing issues in California that I'm sure you've all heard about, or if it's, for example, today or the past couple of days, where a lot of eyes have been on the Dodgers for not standing with the Latino community at this moment. And so I just kind of want to end there and in terms of thinking about today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Leiva. That was an amazing overview of not only what happened, but the work that you're doing now. I just want to commend you and the others in the project for building the trust with the community and doing that work to really adopt an ethical approach to community work. And especially in this case where those communities have already lost so much, right? That's just so important that you took that really thoughtful approach. We have a bunch of questions, which is great. People have you've picked their interest here. There's a question. Has Carol had any change of heart towards the Dodgers?
Yeah, so she is now at a point, part of this project has been really a critical part of it. Her partner or husband was actually a history teacher. And so he's been really critical in kind of showing her the history, showing her the data, and it has changed her perspective in terms of the fact that from her perspective, the Dodgers, there is from scholars, there is no, smoking gun evidence that the Dodgers removed people. And I think she's begun to focus on the more, in some ways, the kind of scarier story, which is this is a story in which local government did not protect its people. This is a story in which the city allowed the removal of over 1,000 families for the purpose of building a stadium, which I know we were talking a little bit earlier. I was talking with Sarah, is that at the time that was not common sense. Now we think it's pretty common sense to think cities will pay for stadiums, or that there will be some type of public funding with stadiums and bringing teams. But at the time, that was actually a quite shocking idea, that you would use land that was land that comes from eminent domain. And the question really became, is a stadium public purpose? So much so that it went to a vote, right? So now Carol is very much aware of and focused on the fact that this is also a story in which the public officials did not protect their residents.
And, connected to that question about did she have a change of heart, I just wonder, and we don't have a ton of time and we want to get to some more questions, but there has been such an evolution of the relationship between the Latino community in LA and the Dodgers. And I don't know if you can just give us a snapshot of what the Dodgers mean to the Latino community today.
Yeah, today it is very much a contested and complex and conflicting relationship, where on the one hand, you have this history and a lot of people know it. But on the other hand, Dodger Stadium has also become really a major marker and a major kind of foundation or home base for Latino LA, and has become a site of Latino excellence. So for the baseball fans in the virtual room that remember Fernando Valenzuela of the 80s, that was really key in grabbing onto a Latino fan base. And the Dodgers have been very intentional since. Even finding Fernando Valenzuela was actually really intentional in terms of trying to court a Latino fan base. And so they've done that this entire time. And there have since then been a number of players that Latino fans have been really connected to.
And another audience member thanks you and wants to ask how you feel about the Dodgers now trying to appeal to Latinos and Mexican Americans with things like Hispanic Heritage Nights or jerseys that say Los Dodgers. He's from Dallas, and he mentions that their team doesn't have a great name.
Yeah, I think, part of this is a very much a conflicted story in which, like I said, the Dodgers have been consistently marketing to the Latino fan base since they came to Los Angeles in the 1960s. And we are still in the thick of it. One thing that we have to remember is that Los Dodgers was created by the people. So Latinos in Los Angeles and radio stations, they came up with Los Dodgers, and Los Dodgers actually became kind of this form of fandom. You bought those T-shirts at the swap meet. It was kind of this alternative creation. And then I want to say, blanking on the exact date. It might have been about 15 years ago, maybe less than that, that the Dodgers actually then turned around and trademarked Los Doyers and incorporated that into their merchandise. And they sent cease and desist letters to vendors who were selling Los Doyers merchandise. So, oftentimes, and I get these questions all the time, well, the Dodgers have created this Latino fandom, and Latinos have created Latino fandom, and they've in some ways made a place for themselves at Dodger Stadium, and Latinos are very good at making space for themselves where they were not previously allowed or desired, and they will take it anyways. And I think that Dodger Stadium and Doyer fandom is a really important example of that. So much is, what Neza just did this last weekend in terms of the Dodgers not wanting her to sing the national anthem in Spanish. And then she went ahead and did it anyways in this really courageous act. And I think that is indicative of a longer history of Latinos deciding what the Dodgers mean to them.
Right. Saturday was a crazy busy day for many of us. So you may have missed that at the Dodgers game, young Dominican singer was invited to sing the national anthem. She wanted to sing it in Spanish, and we do have a Spanish version, an official Spanish version of our national anthem. She wanted to sing that, and they told her no, and she did it anyway. Look for it on Instagram. There's a lot of chatter about it. Dr. Esparza down in Houston wants to know, are there any conversations about reparations?
Yeah, it's actually, this past year, there was a bill that was brought up by Assembly Member Wendy Carrillo asking for reparations. And it did end up passing through the California legislature, but was ultimately vetoed by the governor on the grounds that it was a local issue. There was a number of newspaper articles that you might look up that have a lot of residents had different perspectives on it. This was a bill that was not necessarily deeply kind of organized or collaborated upon, and then we were able to come in after and work with some political officials on it. But there is a tendency of understanding the residents as a monolith, but they represent over 1,200 families, and even the ones that are most vocal and the most active are only a very small portion of those families. And so there are even disagreements among the residents themselves about what reparations means. For some people, reparations mean actually receiving funds. For others, reparations mean, I'll tell you, for Carol, her basic life mission is that we actually have a memorial and a history center where the archive that we're collecting book is displayed, and that this is marked on the public land. For her, that's reparations, is that it's literally baked into the city landscape in perpetuity, right? And so people have different ideas about it, and I think that the battle for reparations and the kinds of arguments over what really should reparations be are still very much going on within the community.
Mm-hmm. Book recommendations. Where can people learn more about this?
So my book is still forthcoming. And
no pressure.
But I would direct people to Eric Avila's first book. He has a chapter on Dodger Stadium. There are also the Smithsonian National Museum did an exhibit called Play Ball, which we worked with on them. That's where that video comes from Chavez Ravine. There's also a couple books on Walter O'Malley that were recently published. And then, there's one called Dodger Stadium, Land of Dreams. There's a very much, if you search Dodger Stadium, Chavez Ravine under books, there are a number of books coming out. And then we are working now on something to publish that is going to incorporate kind of some of the revelations that this archive has given us that really shift the way that this history is being told right now.
Wonderful. We're looking forward to that. Let's see. So we do have one more question, and that's just if you could explain any connection between this history and the Zoot Suit rights.
Oh, absolutely. So the Naval Academy that the Navymen that the zoot suits is always misleading, right? That the military unleashed on zoot suiters, in which they beat people up wearing zoot suits, and they kind of remove their clothing from them. That Naval Academy is in Elysian Park, right next to the neighborhoods. And so in order for them, as they made their way to downtown, they did stop in Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop, and actually engaged in different kinds of violences against zoot suiters in the neighborhood first, before then going to downtown. But absolutely, the fact that Chavez, there are oral histories in which people are talking about the fact that they were zoot suiters, their older brother was a zoot suitor. So that culture was very much alive and well in the three neighborhoods, and was particularly in a vulnerable place because of where it was situated in relation to the Naval Academy.
Wow, so much amazing history and interconnections there, and still just so relevant today. As you were giving your presentation, I just kept thinking of things in Texas, in my home base, and just this is so incredibly relevant. So I'm really glad you're doing this. Looking forward to seeing when it becomes public, when the site becomes public, and best of luck, and congratulations to you and all the folks who've been working on this for several years now. It's a big achievement.
Thank you so much. It's definitely been a labor of love. So thank you.
I'm sure. Okay. Well, thank you everyone who tuned in tonight. As you know, we have these virtual events at least once a month here at MACRI. And then we also have our in-person events in San Antonio. If you can join us. Oh, I'm sorry. One more question.
I see. I see it.
Yeah. If you want to just say it out loud so people who don't see it.
So have there been efforts to establish a small exhibit in Dodger Stadium? One of the things that I've been continuously baffled by is the ways that the Dodgers, frankly, have really tried to avoid this history. They kind of at most speak about it as something that happened before they got here, and then Fernando Valenzuela came, and so we're good with Latinos now. That's usually the kind of narrative that we've gotten. So there has been different proposals and conversations about approaching the Dodgers, and we hope that they will, because we believe that there should be the Dodgers actually, in their renovation of the suites, their suite level, they actually have like a little museum that they created. And so, I think it would be incredibly powerful for that recognition to happen. But they have generally been kind of avoidant of really engaging this history face on.
We'll give them a little more time. Okay. Well, thank you again, Dr. Leiva. Thank you, everyone who tuned in. I just want to share that next week, if you're in San Antonio, we're having a special civic season event. We'll be playing MACRI Loteria, doing some trivia around voting rights. So we'll be having free pizza. It's the next Tuesday, 11:30 to 1:30 at Northwest Vista College. We hope you can join us. Otherwise, we'll see you online or here at the Visitor Center sometime soon. I hope everyone has a wonderful night, and happy Juneteenth. Okay, have a good night, everybody.